I never thought I would witness my entire world unraveling right in front of my eyes. My wife, Kat, was locked in an embrace with my son's football coach, Randy Kane, on the field, kissing him as if I didn't even exist. The scene felt surreal, a twisted betrayal playing out for everyone to see, including my entire staff. The humiliation hit me like a punch to the gut, but the rage that followed was even more powerful. 9 months in Korea, and this was her way of repaying me. I was done playing nice. I had a plan, a brutal one, and Randy Kane had no idea what was coming. I wanted him to feel every second of my wrath. Cold and calculated revenge was the only way to end this nightmare. As the game unfolded, the tension in the air was palpable. The score changed rapidly. Lick High would score, and then Ferguson High would counter. Danny Keel, Ferguson's quarterback and my son, was leading his team with a fierce determination, guiding them to tie the game. The back-and-forth dynamic kept everyone on the edge of their seats. Whenever Ferguson had the ball, my staff at the JAG office paused their work to watch Danny light up the field. Camp Humphreys, Korea, was 15 hours ahead of Dallas, Texas. So while everyone in Texas was enjoying a Saturday afternoon, it was still Friday night here. The game was displayed on a massive 90-inch screen in our office, connected to LTC Grant Keel's phone. In the second half, Ferguson began to pull ahead, and as the 2-minute warning approached in the fourth quarter, they were leading 48-38. It wasn't over yet, anything could happen in football. But as the clock wound down, it looked like victory was within reach for Danny's team, and they eventually won by 10 points. Danny played an outstanding game, completing 275 yards and throwing 4 touchdowns, although he did throw 1 interception. Meanwhile, the JAG staff worked diligently on a Saturday to prepare for an upcoming Inspector General visit. Even though we were overdue for an inspection, LTC Keel felt confident about our chances. Still, there lingered a small worry that someone might have overlooked a signature or a stamp on a document. Perfection was the goal, especially since this would be Grant's last inspection before retirement. He was set to retire in 3 months, but after a recent evaluation, it had been decided that it was time for a change in leadership. Once the inspection was over, Grant would return home to begin the transition from active duty. Only his brother knew about his new plans, and Grant was eager to see the surprised looks on his wife and son's faces. After the thrilling game, Grant's staff erupted in cheers for Danny. The excitement in the air was electric as students, parents, and fans flooded the field to celebrate the win. When the JAG staff spotted a lovely brunette embracing Danny, the cheers and laughter in the office grew louder. Everyone knew about LTC Keel's wife from the picture on his desk and admired her charm. The joy on Kat's face was evident as she celebrated Danny's stellar performance amidst the crowd, which was filled with cheers, laughter, and even a few tears of joy. But then, in a moment that felt like a punch in the gut, Kat did something that silenced the office. She leaped into Randy Kane's arms, wrapping her legs around his waist in a display of warmth and gratitude. Dressed in black jeans, a white tank top, and stylish black boots, she looked both happy and proud in that moment. My heart sank as I watched from my desk, the video frozen on my screen. Kat had her legs wrapped around Kane, sharing a moment that I couldn't comprehend. LTC Keel's disbelief mirrored my own as the JAG staff looked away, embarrassed. Danny was tugging at Kat's shirt as Kane released her, and there she stood, still clutching his neck. I couldn't process the scene unfolding before me. I closed my laptop, sat back in my chair, and felt a wave of shock wash over me. What on earth just happened? I muttered under my breath. "Colonel, are you okay?" Captain Lee Dunaway asked, breaking the silence that had enveloped the office. I shook my head, still reeling from the scene. It's not just that she's unfaithful. It's how blatant it is. The words felt heavy on my tongue, and I struggled to articulate my emotions. Captain Dunaway took my hand and pulled me up from my chair. "You need some fresh air," she said firmly, leading me out the back door into the small parking lot behind the JAG offices. Standing there in the cool Korean morning sun, I knew I must have looked a wreck, tears streaming down my face. "What on earth?" Captain Dunaway exclaimed, her eyes wide with concern. "What she did, that's really messed up." As I stood there trying to process the betrayal, my phone beeped with a new text message from Danny. "Wish you were here. Awesome game. We won 48-38. I threw for 275 yards and 4 touchdowns." I stared at the screen, unsure how to respond. Captain Dunaway sensed my hesitation and gently grabbed my wrist. "Text him back like normal. Keep it simple. Don't say anything you might regret later." I nodded, taking a deep breath before replying. "Dad, that's great. Wish I was there too. Great job, Danny." "Grant, how long do you think this has been going on?" Captain Dunaway asked, concern etched on her face. "Does it really matter if it's been a day, a month, or a year?" I answered, feeling the weight of the situation press down on me. "I've been in Korea for 9 months, so it could have been happening the whole time I've been here. We bought the house a year ago, so I doubt it started before then, since I was home every weekend. But now, I'm left wondering how many others there might be. Honestly, is Danny even my son?" We talked for another 30 minutes until I felt calm enough to head back to the office and face my team. It was one of the most awkward moments of my life, and they all felt pity for me. After addressing them, I thanked my staff for coming in and let everyone go for the day. If we hadn't passed the inspection by now, it was likely we never would. The following week felt like a blur. Inspections like this were routine, similar to thorough checks in private companies, but just as intense. As the days rolled on, I found myself trapped in a cycle of emotions, anger, confusion, and sorrow, all fueled by the shocking betrayal I had witnessed. I knew I had to find a way to confront Kat, to uncover the truth behind her actions, and to reclaim my life. The battle was just beginning. Every choice you make and every action you take gets reviewed, and you have to respond clearly and respectfully. In the end, they passed the inspection, and it was time to hand over the reins to LTCK's replacement, Lieutenant Colonel Kiana Cardwell. Grant had known Kiana for a few years and was confident she was an excellent officer and a skilled attorney, so the JAG team would be in good hands. The only other person besides Grant who wasn't staying in Korea with Colonel Cardwell was Captain Lynn Dunaway. She would travel with him to Fort Cavazos in Texas, where he would leave active duty and join the Army Reserve, while she would take on her new position with the JAG office at 3 Corps. Grant felt a deep sense of gratitude toward Captain Dunaway after she stood by him through the difficult period following his wife's infidelity. She had been a steadfast support during his transition out of the only full-time job he had ever known. Meanwhile, Randy Kane was in a foul mood as he walked toward his truck. He had started his day in a relaxed manner, spending time with his girlfriend until they both felt a sense of connection. Girlfriend? He thought to himself. Was that really what she was to him? Kat lay beside him, looking content yet pensive. "I'm going to miss this," she said, her voice tinged with sadness. Her words struck a nerve with Randy. "We don't have to end things, you know," he replied, trying to inject some enthusiasm into the moment. "You could leave him and marry me. I'd say yes in a heartbeat if you wanted." Kat tensed up next to him, her expression shifting. "I've told you before, that's not going to happen. I love my husband. When Grant comes back from the Army, I want to spend my life with him, making things right after this short affair. When he's home, we'll see each other at school, maybe in the hallway or the cafeteria. We can smile and say hi. I'll keep teaching science, and you can keep coaching. We can be friends, but my heart is with my husband, and nothing will change that." Randy let out a harsh laugh, frustration bubbling to the surface. "If you care for him so much, why are you here with me? Is it because it's more exciting with me? If that's true, how can you just go back to your old life?" Kat shook her head, her eyes steady. "Being with you is not better than being with Grant. It feels different, sure, but not necessarily better. He still makes me feel special, just like that first time we met back in Sydney. Randy winced at the memory of that first encounter. Kat had met her husband, Grant, at the 2000 Summer Olympics in Sydney, Australia. She played on the U.S. women's volleyball team, while Grant was part of the U.S. fencing team. Their connection had been instant, blossoming in the vibrant atmosphere of the Olympic Village, where young athletes mingled and formed friendships amidst a buzz of energy. Kat was from Dallas, Texas, and Grant grew up just an hour away in Ferguson, making their bond even stronger. While the U.S. women's volleyball team didn't medal at the Olympics, Grant had earned 2 medals of his own, a silver for individual sabre and a bronze for team sabre. Kat had excitedly shared this with Randy, explaining how Grant loved sabre fencing for its dynamic movements and scoring. Randy had initially been confused, imagining fencing as just a quirky hobby rather than a real sport, which only fueled his feelings of frustration and envy. He couldn't help but feel jealous that Grant was not only married to someone as stunning as Kat but also an Olympic medalist. As Grant and Kat enjoyed their time at the Olympic Village, Randy was back in middle school, focused on improving himself for high school football. He had played high school football and continued at the University of Arkansas, where he stood 6 feet 6 inches and weighed 265 pounds as a defensive lineman. He wasn't drafted into the NFL, but he joined the practice squad with the Detroit Lions as a walk-on, only to be let go after a year. He had a brief stint with Buffalo's practice squad but was released after just 3 weeks. Realizing his chances of making it in the NFL were fading, he moved to the Canadian Football League, playing with the Ottawa Renegades, but was released mid-season. After all that, Randy transitioned to coaching. He worked hard and eventually became a successful high school coach, leading Ferguson to victory over Luck in the Texas 6A championship. After that win, he received several offers from college coaching teams and felt pleased with his options. Most of these job offers came with the stipulation that his friend Danny Keel would have to join him. Randy wished he could convince Kat to leave Soldier Boy and marry him, then everything would be perfect. He thought he had 3 months to persuade Kat to leave her husband for him. After that, Grant would retire and come home. Kat had mentioned a chance for them to restart their relationship, but Randy knew it would never be what he truly wanted. Danny would be starting college in the fall and wouldn't be around as much, further complicating things. Their past encounters had been close calls, and one unexpected moment had turned chaotic. After spending time together, Randy walked into the kitchen for a drink, thinking no one was home. To his surprise, Danny was sitting at the table. "What are you doing here?" Danny exclaimed, shock flooding his face. Randy reacted instinctively, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "Hey, wait, let's not jump to conclusions." But as Danny stood up, ready to confront him, Randy realized the tension in the air could explode at any moment. "It's not what you think. I swear." Randy's heart raced as he attempted to navigate the unexpected confrontation. He felt trapped between the thrill of his connection with Kat and the reality of her life with Grant. How could he find a way to hold on to what they had without destroying everything else? It all went south in an instant. Then he fell hard onto the kitchen floor, and the crash echoed through the house. Hearing the commotion, Kat rushed into the kitchen, just in time to see Danny struggling to get back on his feet. She stepped between the two of them, her voice steady and soothing as she urged them to calm down. "Danny," she reassured him, "Randy's relationship with me is just a passing phase. It won't affect your family or your dad, I promise." Her tone softened as she pleaded, "Please keep this a secret from him. If you tell him, it will break his heart." Kat emphasized how important it was to maintain the status quo, not just for her marriage but for Danny's father's well-being. Danny nodded, agreeing to keep quiet. Over the next few months, he seemed to accept his mother's relationship with Randy, even making light-hearted jokes about it occasionally. But lately, things felt different. Randy could sense the tension when he was around Danny. Deep down, he knew he played a part in this discomfort. A few times after leaving Kat's room, he had made comments that could easily be misinterpreted as inappropriate. He recognized that he should apologize for those remarks but had yet to find the courage to do so. Things had escalated a few weeks ago when Danny walked into Randy's room and caught him looking at a collection of trophies. "I didn't know you practiced karate," Danny remarked, curiosity etched on his face. Randy pointed to a framed certificate on the wall, his pride shining through. "I'm a black belt too. I've been doing karate since I was 8. He hoped that by sharing this part of himself, he could forge a different kind of bond with Danny, a connection that might allow him to be seen as a mentor, or even a stepdad. Maybe if Danny saw him that way, he would be open to talking about changing colleges. "Could you leave my room?" Danny asked politely, cutting through Randy's enthusiastic chatter about martial arts. When Randy tried to keep the conversation going, Danny's frustration broke through. "Get out of my room." Randy wanted to respond, but he thought better of it. He didn't want to jeopardize his relationship with Kat over a moment of anger. "Have you thought more about changing Danny's mind about college?" Randy asked, trying to keep the dialogue going. Kat rolled her eyes at his question. "He's not going to change his mind. He's had this plan for so long, and he won't back out now. His father went to West Point, and that's where he wants to go too," she sighed, exasperated. "I just don't understand why he wants to go there when he could attend any Division I school in the country. It doesn't make sense. He plays at a top school, gets drafted into the NFL, and his future is set." Randy didn't mention that excelling at football could also lead to a college coaching job, maybe even a shot in the NFL coaching world. He envisioned a future where Danny was his stepson, and he couldn't shake the feeling that Danny held the key to his own ambitions, even if things didn't work out with Kat. Sensing Randy's unease, Kat leaned over and shared a gentle moment with him, providing a brief sense of calm amid the swirling tension. Later that day, as Randy walked around the front of his truck after leaving Kat's house, he noticed a glaring problem: the driver's front tire was flat. "Great," he muttered to himself. "Just what I needed today." He was already running late due to the time spent with Kat, and now a flat tire was just compounding his frustration. Today was the pep rally to unveil and celebrate the state championship banner, and the entire football team and coaching staff would be honored. Randy's role was to give a short speech and introduce each player, sharing fun facts about them. Reporters would be there, and Randy saw this as a golden opportunity to boost his coaching profile. As he crouched down next to the flat tire, he suddenly felt a presence behind him. Before he could react, a jolt of pain hit him, knocking him to his knees. The pain wasn't immediate, it came in waves, intensifying as he turned to confront the person who had attacked him. The individual wore a black hoodie, dark sunglasses, and a mask, obscuring their face. Time seemed to slow as Randy watched the person raise a baseball bat. Just as the bat swung down, everything went black. When he finally came to, the pain was overwhelming, but he couldn't register it through the haze of confusion. The attacker had moved quickly, grabbing a nearby bike and pedaling away into the distance. Meanwhile, Kat was rushing out of her garage, running late for the pep rally herself. She was surprised to see Randy's truck still parked in front of her house. Her home sat in a quiet cul-de-sac, and she hadn't thought much about him leaving it there. Her 3-car garage held her Lexus, Danny's Camaro, and Grant's Lincoln SUV, making the street the only available spot for his Dodge Ram with its large tires. As she backed out, a flash of movement caught her eye. When she got closer, her heart sank as she spotted Randy lying in the street, his body twisted in unnatural angles. Panic surged through her. What if he had fallen and needed help? She quickly parked her car and rushed over to him. When she reached him, her breath caught in her throat. His arms and legs were in strange positions, and his face looked alarmingly wrong. She gasped, feeling dizzy for a moment as the reality of the situation set in. Once she regained her composure, Kat grabbed her phone and called for help. In a moment of clarity, she remembered to call the high school to inform them that neither she nor Coach Kane would be coming in that day. Meanwhile, Detective Mann and Officer Lucas sat together on the couch in Kat's living room, politely declining her offer of coffee. "Hopefully, this won't take long, Mrs. Keel," Detective Mann said, his expression serious. "What was the reason for Coach Kane's visit this morning?" Kat's cheeks flushed crimson at the question. "He stayed overnight," she replied softly, her eyes glued to her hands in her lap. The detectives exchanged glances, and Mann pressed on. "Are you close to Coach Kane?" Kat nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "How long has this bond been formed?" Mann continued, his voice gentle but probing. "About 9 months," Kat whispered, her voice barely audible. "Does your husband live with you?" Mann asked, his tone steady but curious. Kat felt the weight of the question as she took a deep breath, knowing that the truth of her situation was about to unravel. Detective Lucas leaned forward, a serious look on his face. "Mrs. Keel, is your husband stationed in Korea?" Kat nodded slowly, her heart racing. "He'll be retiring in just 3 months and then he'll come home." She paused, taking a moment to gather her thoughts as her eyes filled with tears. "Does he know about your relationship with Coach K?" Lucas asked gently, his voice steady but probing. "Oh no. He must never find out," Kat pleaded, her voice trembling. "It would break his heart. We have to keep this from him." Detective Lucas exchanged a glance with his partner, Detective Mann, before responding. "Mrs. Keel, we really need to talk to your husband. A man was seriously hurt after leaving the house he shares with you. We can't keep this a secret from him." Kat's composure cracked, and she rushed out of the room, tears streaming down her face. She needed a moment to collect herself. When she returned with a box of tissues, the detectives continued their questioning. "Mrs. Keel, are you absolutely sure your husband is in Korea? Could he have come back to the United States?" Detective Lucas asked, concern etched on his face. "No, that's not possible. If Grant were in the U.S., he would be here. He cares too much about me to stay away from home," Kat insisted, pulling out her iPhone with shaking hands. "Look. The Find My iPhone app shows his location is still in Korea." The detectives glanced at each other, their skepticism palpable. The phone's location only confirmed that it was indeed in Korea, but it didn't rule out the possibility of a return. "Mrs. Keel, who else lives at your house?" Detective Mann inquired, his tone professional but firm. "My son, Danny," Kat replied, her voice steadying. "Could he have harmed Coach K?" Detective Mann pressed, eyebrows raised in suspicion. "No. That's impossible. I heard his car leave about 30 minutes before the incident," Kat explained, a hint of desperation creeping into her voice. "He was at the pep rally for the school at that time. Danny and Randy have a good relationship. Randy was Danny's football coach," she added, her words tumbling out. Detective Mann recalled the town's excitement when Danny's team won the state championship, and how he'd seen Kat cheering passionately on the sidelines. Many had thought she was either the co-coach's wife or his girlfriend, unaware that she was married to someone else. "Did your son know about your relationship with Coach K?" Lucas asked, noting the emotional complexity of the situation. "Yes, he didn't like it at first, but he got used to it. I told him it wouldn't change my marriage, and he accepted that," Kat answered, looking directly into Detective Lucas's eyes. Mann and Lucas exchanged worried glances. "Mrs. Keel, I see you have a doorbell camera. Can we take a look at the footage?" Detective Mann asked, shifting his stance. Kat blinked in surprise. "Oh, I almost forgot. I have the app on my iPad." She hurried to grab her device from a nearby table, tapping the screen a few times before handing it to Detective Mann. "Just hit play." The detectives leaned in as the video began to play. They watched closely as Randy Kane exited the Keel house and walked around to his truck. He appeared to notice a flat tire. The truck obstructed most of the view, but as Randy crouched down to inspect it, a tall figure suddenly dashed toward him from across the street. The figure was dressed in a black hoodie, sunglasses, and a mask, making it impossible to identify them. The person swung an object several times before jumping on a bike and pedaling away, the object tucked securely under their arm. The footage offered little clarity, and despite being in high definition, they knew enhancing it might not yield much more information. Detective Mann requested permission from Kat to send the clip to his police email, which she granted with a nod. "Mrs. Keel," Detective Mann said, emphasizing her title, "can you think of anyone who might have wanted to hurt Coach K?" Kat's face crumpled with sorrow. "No, I can't. I can't imagine anyone wanting to do something so terrible. Randy didn't deserve this." Meanwhile, across town, Grant Keel was sitting at the dining table in his brother's house, poring over the paperwork his divorce lawyer had sent him. Just then, the doorbell rang. His sister-in-law, Betty Lou, answered the door and called out to him that he had some visitors. Grant approached the door to find a man and a woman flashing badges that identified them as detectives from the Ferguson Police Department. "Can we come in?" the man asked. Grant exchanged a glance with Betty Lou, who shrugged. With a sigh, he stepped aside and let the officers enter. As the detectives entered the living room, they noticed Betty Lou Keel. Standing just under 6 feet tall and weighing about 150 pounds, her trendy dark hair was cut stylishly longer on one side, with a streak of gray that accentuated her striking blue eyes. A small bump adorned her nose, and a faint scar from the corner of her left eye gave her a unique appearance. Grant stood tall as well, over 6 feet and 180 pounds, his athletic build a testament to his active lifestyle. The detectives quickly learned that he wasn't a runner, he was a fencer, a sport that had taken him to the 2000 Sydney Olympics. His dark hair was starting to show some gray, and his kind blue eyes held a hint of sadness that Lucas couldn't ignore. "Should we call you Mr. Keel or Lieutenant Colonel Keel?" Detective Mann asked, introducing himself. "Mr. is fine. You can call me Grant or Colonel. I just got promoted to full colonel, but I don't worry about titles," he replied, trying to keep the mood light despite the tension in the air. "Promoted? We thought you were retiring," Detective Mann remarked. "Just from active duty," Grant explained. "I'm in the reserves now. I have monthly meetings and a couple of weeks in the summer. I hope to stick around long enough to earn a star," he said with determination. Detective Lucas nodded, appreciating the man's dedication. Having been a military police officer at the rank of E4 herself, she felt a connection to Grant, who had accomplished so much, an Olympic medalist, a lawyer, a full colonel aiming to become a brigadier general. "Mrs. Keel seems misled," Detective Mann commented, shifting the conversation. "We'll stick with Mr. Keel for now. I think you know why we're here." "I have an idea," Grant replied, his face growing serious. "Someone hurt the man who was with my wife, and you suspect me. Was it you?" Detective Lucas asked bluntly. Grant sighed, running a hand through his hair. "No matter how I answer that, I'll still look like a suspect, so I'll stay quiet on that one," he replied, a hint of frustration in his voice. "Can you tell us where you were 3 hours ago?" Detective Mann pressed, not letting up. As the detectives prepared to dive deeper into the investigation, the tension in the room thickened, and both Kat and Grant felt the weight of the unfolding drama. Little did they know that the truth was about to unravel, leading to a confrontation that would change everything. It was a typical morning, a routine that had become almost second nature to me. At 7:30 a.m., I was working out with my brother, Leland. He had converted a couple of spare bedrooms into a makeshift gym, and we spent our mornings pumping iron together. We usually worked out from around 7:30 until about 8:30. After our session, Leland would shower and start his remote work, while I'd wait my turn before diving into my own tasks for the day. As we were finishing up our workout, Detective Mann and Detective Lucas entered the room, their serious expressions cutting through the light-hearted banter between Leland and me. "So, besides your brother, were there any other witnesses?" Detective Mann asked. "No, just him," I replied, glancing at Leland, who was still catching his breath. "My sister-in-law, Betty Lou, leaves for work just before we start, So it's only the two of us in the mornings. Detective Lucas shifted his stance, leaning in slightly. When was the last time you visited your house, the one where your wife and son live, where the incident with Randy Kane happened? I felt a knot tighten in my stomach at the mention of the incident. About a week ago, I said. I went there when no one was home to grab some clothes and paperwork. I didn't touch anything of my wife's or Coach Kane's. You knew they were seeing each other, Detective Lucas stated, not as a question but as a fact. I did, I admitted, a wave of resignation washing over me. I've come to terms with her choices and the end of our marriage. It is what it is. Detective Mann exchanged glances with Lucas. Until a couple of hours ago, she believed you were still in the army and stationed in Korea. When we told her you left Korea a month ago and were living with your brother, she didn't believe us. She called your office, and they confirmed you left weeks ago. Your wife was quite distressed when she found out. We had to call an ambulance for her. Really? I said, a tinge of regret creeping in. I'd like to say it's Coach Kane's responsibility to take care of her, but from what I hear about his health, he's not in any position to do that. I noticed the detectives exchanging skeptical looks. As for my phone, I left it charging in my office. The officer who took my place is sending it to me, I added, attempting to sound nonchalant, but I could feel their doubt weighing heavily in the air. That seems pretty convenient, doesn't it? Detective Mann pressed. I shrugged, knowing I wasn't going to convince them of my innocence with simple explanations. Just then, Leland emerged from his home office, eyebrows raised as he caught sight of the two detectives. Do they think you did something? He asked, concern flickering in his eyes. I nodded slowly. They haven't directly accused me yet, but they're definitely hinting at it. They're about to ask how I found out about my wife's situation and why I didn't tell her I was back in Ferguson. After that, they'll probably want to talk to you about my alibi. Then they might try to arrest me. But they'll quickly realize they have no proof and no real case. Then they'll get frustrated and tell me not to leave town before moving on to someone else. Sounds about right, Leland agreed, his tone surprisingly calm. The detectives exchanged bewildered glances, clearly thrown off by our nonchalance regarding the gravity of the situation. Detective Mann narrowed his eyes at us. How do you know what we're thinking? He asked, suspicion creeping into his voice. I used to be an army lawyer, I replied, holding his gaze. I've handled more investigations than you can count. My brother worked in army investigations before he retired and started his own security business. We can guess what you're thinking before you even say it. Detective Mann's annoyance was palpable. He didn't like that we could read him so easily. If you know all the questions, then please go ahead and answer them, he said, trying to regain control. I took a breath and fixed my gaze on him. I found out about my wife's relationship because I saw her with Kane after the state championship game. I'm sure you've seen the video. Detective Mann nodded. It was a well-circulated video. Everyone thought it was Randy Kane's girlfriend, but after the incident, people began to realize who the woman really was. I didn't tell her I was back in Ferguson because I didn't want to see her, I continued. I'm working with a divorce lawyer, and I didn't want to hear her reasons or explanations for what she did. And what about your son? Detective Lucas asked, his brow furrowing. You haven't reached out to him either? I sighed. You saw how he reacted to Kane and my wife. He didn't seem concerned at all. Detective Lucas tilted his head slightly, studying me. Seems like there's not much to discuss, does it? I shrugged, feeling the tension in the air. So, do you have an alibi? Should we show them the recordings? Leland chimed in. Now seems like the right time, I agreed. Leland stepped away briefly and returned with an iPad. He pointed the TV remote at the large screen mounted on the wall and connected his device. I have cameras around the house, hallway, front door, backyard. Here's what happened this morning. As the video played, We saw different angles captured by the security cameras. One showed the street, another the backyard, and a third focused on the garage. The remaining cameras provided views of the kitchen, living room, and hallway where the bedrooms were located. This video is from 7:22 this morning, Leland narrated. The screen displayed Betty Lou as she exited her bedroom, dressed smartly for her job as CFO. The living room camera followed her until she vanished into the kitchen. The kitchen camera tracked her movements until she made her way to the garage. The garage door opened, revealing her entering her SUV. She backed out, and the camera captured her driving onto the street just as the doorbell camera recorded the car's departure from the side view. Leland paused the video, pointing to the timestamp. "This was taken at 7:25 this morning," he said. He then navigated to 7:28, and we watched as Leland and I appeared on the screen, walking toward a room in the hallway from different angles. I was dressed in my workout gear, looking determined and focused. Detective Lucas leaned forward, eyes narrowing as he observed the footage. "You both look like you're in the clear." As we continued watching, I could feel the tension in the room ease slightly. Maybe this evidence would work in my favor after all. But deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. The detectives were still suspicious, and I had to tread carefully as I navigated the storm that was brewing around me. Leland and I lounged in the living room, both dressed in matching red hoodies and sweatpants. It was a lazy afternoon, and the tension in the air was palpable as we waited for Grant to join us. Just then, Grant stepped out of the guest room, his demeanor unreadable as he walked in. "Let's sit here and watch the empty hallway for an hour, or I can just skip ahead," Leland suggested, glancing at the two detectives in the room. "Skip ahead," Detective Mann replied, impatience creeping into his voice. Leland tapped a few times on the iPad screen, pausing the video at 8:26 a.m. "This is from yesterday. They'd been working out for 58 minutes. He looked at the screen, frowning slightly. "The video looks almost identical to today's, except the times are a few minutes different." Betty Lou was wearing a stylish black pantsuit instead of a pencil skirt. The footage rolled on, showing Grant and Leland emerging from opposite ends of the hall, both clad in matching gray sweats. They met at the door of the home gym, ready for another grueling workout. They spent an hour in the gym again, Leland noted as he tapped the screen once more, shifting to another set of recordings. "This one is from the morning the incident occurred," he said. The scene showed Betty Lou stepping out of her bedroom in workout clothes, a thin black hoodie and exercise tights paired with white sneakers. "I took a day off to train for a triathlon coming up in a couple of weeks. Today was a bike day, and I rode around Ferguson Park 4 times, she explained in the footage, her voice lively as she backed her SUV out of the garage, revealing bicycles attached to a bike carrier on the back. As the video continued, Leland stepped out of his bedroom, dressed in a black hoodie and sweatpants. A moment later, Grant emerged from the guest room, mirroring Leland's attire. The detectives exchanged puzzled glances, eyebrows raised. "Are you serious?" Detective Lucas asked, incredulous. "Do you really think we'll believe it's just a coincidence that you three are wearing the same clothes as the person who attacked C?" Leland and Grant shrugged in unison. "Let the recording tell the story," Grant replied, his tone steady. "I won't speed through the recording, but I'll play it a bit faster so you can watch it all before I do. Can I get you two some coffee?" "Even at this pace, we'll be here for about half an hour," Leland offered, trying to lighten the mood. Once everyone had a steaming cup in hand, Leland resumed the video. They all watched intently as the timer counted down. After 25 minutes, Leland slowed the playback to normal speed. They saw the brothers leave the gym at 8:31 a.m., still clad in their hoodies. "That's the day we're talking about," Leland pointed out. "You can see that neither of us left that room." He looked at the detectives with a mix of determination and frustration. "I'll share the recordings with you without needing a warrant." The detectives remained skeptical. "Can you show us the gym?" Detective Lucas asked, his voice tinged with doubt. "Sure," Leland replied, leading the way. The officers followed him into the hallway, casting glances back at the small camera discreetly hidden in the ceiling. They entered the gym area, which had been created by merging 3 bedrooms and removing the closets. One side was filled with weights, benches, dumbbells, kettlebells, a rowing machine, and an elliptical trainer. The other half was set up like a small dojo, with shelves displaying trophies and framed photos of Leland and Betty Lou competing in mixed martial arts. In one of the pictures, Betty Lou stood tall, her arm raised in victory, a proud referee by her side. Her opponent looked bewildered, their coach helping them up. Betty Lou wore a determined expression, showing clear signs of a tough match. "Wow," Detective Lucas murmured softly, admiring the picture. "Your wife is impressive." "You bet she is," Leland replied, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. "For many reasons." He gestured toward the trophies and photos. "She's incredibly loyal to her family and friends. She's the best person I know, one of a kind. I'll always remind her of that." Grant nodded, a pang of sadness gripping him. He once felt that way about his own wife, but now he realized Kat was never like Betty Lou. Kat lacked that kind of loyalty, and the realization cut deeper than he expected. "What about the window?" Detective Lucas asked, his gaze shifting to the regular house windows in the room, wooden blinds pulled up. "Are you suggesting that you could have sneaked out during training to go after Coach Kane?" "Could have," Grant replied, the tension rising in his voice. "But so could he." Detective Mann interjected, pointing at both Grant and Leland. "That's true," Leland agreed, but he quickly added, "but we didn't do that." "Can you prove it?" Detective Lucas pressed, his tone sounding tense. "Detective," Leland said firmly, "that's not the right question." "Oh? What is the right question then?" Detective Lucas asked, clearly annoyed. "The right question is, can you prove that we did sneak out?" Grant shot back, his frustration boiling over. Leland turned to the detectives. "I think it's time for you two to leave now." Just then, the phone rang in the background. "Colonel Cardwell, how can I help you?" Grant's voice shifted, professionalism creeping back into his tone. "Colonel Cardwell, I hear you're in charge of the JAG office at Camp Humphreys," a voice on the other end said. "That's correct. Who's calling?" "Hello, Colonel. My name is Detective Brenda Lucas from the Ferguson Police Department in Texas. I'm calling about your predecessor, Colonel Grant Keel." "Oh yes, how is Grant?" Colonel Cardwell asked, his curiosity piqued. "He was doing well the last time I saw him," she replied. Colonel Cardwell mentioned that Colonel Keel left his cell phone in his office in Korea. "Yes, that's right. It was on the charger in what used to be his office. I held on to it because I wasn't sure where to send it. A few days ago, he called with an address to ship it, which I did." "Colonel, when did he give you the address?" Lucas inquired. "This past Monday," Cardwell answered. "He also asked me to answer any questions about him for anyone who calls." "It sounds like Grant was expecting some trouble," Detective Lucas said, piecing it all together. Great, Lucas thought, a chill running down his spine. This was shaping up to be much more complicated than they had anticipated. As the conversation unfolded, the gravity of the situation settled heavily over them. Secrets, lies, and the thin thread of loyalty that once seemed unbreakable were now in jeopardy. Little did they know that the true depths of betrayal were just beginning to unravel. Randy Kane's worries about his wife finding out he was nearby only intensified when he had his phone sent back to him. Detective Lucas had just finished speaking with Colonel Cardwell, who had confirmed everything Randy had said about his phone. She also mentioned that she had shipped it directly to him. "Colonel Cardwell is very organized," Lucas noted. "If she said she sent it, you can be sure she did. But I want to be the one to open that package. I want to see your cell phone first. I don't have a warrant, so you can say no, but this could really help prove your innocence." There was a long pause on the other end before Randy finally responded. "I don't mind. I have nothing to hide. I'll call you when it arrives. If she sent it on Monday, it should be here in a day or so." As Detective Lucas and her partner scoured Leland Keel's home for any leads, they discovered that the house across the street had a doorbell camera facing the Keel property. When they approached the homeowner, Bobby Lee Guerin, he confirmed that his doorbell camera recorded video footage and saved it online. The detectives were thrilled to have a lead in the case and quickly sat down with Guerin to review the footage. Because the houses were positioned diagonally, Leland Keel's doorbell camera had a limited view, capturing only a glimpse of Guerin's home. In stark contrast, Guerin's camera had a clear view of the entire Keel residence. Bobby Lee Guerin was a captain in the fire department and designed fire safety equipment, holding several patents and collaborating with various companies. He had a workshop behind his house, filled with tools and machinery for crafting his designs. Divorced and a black belt in karate, he often spent his free time practicing martial arts. The video provided a full view of the Keel house, including the gym windows, during the time of the incident involving Randy. Around 7:15 p.m., the footage showed Bobby Lee Guerin dressed in a black hoodie and sweatpants, with white sneakers, as he transported gardening tools from his garage to the front porch. He carried a rake, a hoe, and a shovel. The detectives watched intently as Guerin leaned the tools against the wall where the doorbell camera was located. To their surprise, he placed the shovel with the blade facing up and the handle down, blocking the camera's view completely. For over an hour, the camera captured Guerin working with the tools until he finally began spreading mulch around his yard. "What did I just see?" Lucas exclaimed, frustrated. "He blocked the camera." "That's what it looks like," her partner replied, equally annoyed. Guerin defended himself, explaining, "I was just going to work on the mulch, so I took my tools outside and leaned them against the wall. But then I felt a bit unwell, so I went back inside to rest on the sofa. When I felt better, I went back out to finish mulching." "Really? Just a coincidence that you were dressed all in black?" Lucas replied with a hint of sarcasm, her suspicion rising. "You must be really great friends if you were risking a serious charge for them." "Leland and Betty Lou. Betty Lou is my sister, and I've known Leland and Grant for a long time," Guerin replied, slightly annoyed. "Sorry, what was your question again?" As soon as Grant handed over the package, Detective Lucas eagerly opened the box to find Keel's iPhone. She pressed the power button, but nothing happened. The screen remained dark. "Can I keep this for a few days?" she asked, glancing at Grant. "Sure, take your time," he said, grateful for the attention to detail. After charging the phone at the station, Lucas and her partner gathered around, eager to see what they could uncover. Lucas had an iPhone herself and often found herself intrigued by her partner's Android device. Leaning back, Man was ready to let his partner take the lead as the phone finally powered on, buzzing with incoming texts and missed calls. Lucas opened iMessage and began scrolling through the messages. The first thing that struck her was the sheer number of texts from Kat to her husband, filled with typical sentiments of love and care. It felt absurd given the context of the recent incident. After Randy's altercation, Kat had been particularly active in sending messages, as her situation had become increasingly serious. There were a few texts from his brother, but what shocked them most was the volume of messages from Captain Lynn Dunaway. The detectives knew that Lynn had worked with Grant in Korea and was now stationed at Fort Cavazos. Her messages appeared friendly and innocent, lacking any overt signs of deeper feelings. They were mostly check-ins, ensuring Grant was settling in well and coping with his wife's situation. They also noted conversations about how Grant had discovered his wife's betrayal in such a public manner. It had to have been devastating. Next, they found texts from Denis, Grant's son, sent right after one of his games, along with Grant's encouraging replies. There were a few more casual messages back and forth before they stumbled upon a video Denis had sent to his dad, Uncle Leland, Aunt Betty Lou, and Bobby Lee. In the video, recorded a week before the incident, Danny stood in front of a mirror, clearly trying to muster some enthusiasm. The pep rally for the banner presentation is next Monday at 9 a.m. I hope you can make it, but I'll understand if you're too busy. I'll talk to you soon. The detectives felt a pang of sympathy for the boy. He sounded so sad, especially since his dad's family was drifting away due to the secrecy surrounding his mother's situation. "Can someone explain this to me simply?" Man asked, shaking his head. "He hasn't had his phone for over a month, but it looks like he's been replying to messages from his kid and his wife this whole time. What's going on?" "If he doesn't have another phone, then he probably has an iPad or a Mac that's synced to his iPhone with his iCloud account," Lucas replied, piecing things together. "We need to investigate that next." "Please, just try to stay calm," Detective Man urged gently. "We're all concerned about your well-being." Kat took a deep breath, trying to gather her thoughts. "I just want to clear things up with Grant. He needs to understand that the past couple of months don't define our marriage." Detective Lucas nodded empathetically. "It's completely understandable that you feel this way. Open communication is key in any relationship. Complicated doesn't even begin to cover it," Detective Man added, his expression serious. "Your husband is facing some serious accusations right now." "I know," Kat insisted, her voice rising slightly. "But he loves our family. I need him to realize that I've always been here for him, and I want to fix what's broken. There are processes we have to follow, Mrs. Keel," Detective Lucas said softly. "Our priority is ensuring everyone's safety. Would it help to speak with someone who can assist you emotionally during this time?" Kat glanced away, her heart heavy with a mix of hope and dread. "Maybe. But I just want Grant back home where he belongs." As they spoke, a sense of hope lingered in the air, a faint reminder of the bond that had once held their family together. "Do you know how your husband found out about the situation?" Detective Man asked, breaking the silence. "I assumed someone told him," Kat replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "No, ma'am," Detective Man corrected gently. "He said he was watching the state championship game on a big screen in the office with his entire team. After the game, he went to Coach Kane and embraced him. Everyone in the office saw it live." Kat's eyes widened in shock. No. That can't be how it happened. I would remember that. It didn't occur like that." "Mom," Danny said softly, his tone a mix of sympathy and firmness, "it did happen. Everyone saw it. I stood there while Dad watched, knowing I was aware of your betrayal." Detective Lucas noticed the look on Kat's face as reality sunk in. She was likely facing the end of her marriage. Just then, a knock at the door interrupted the tense moment. A round, middle-aged man entered, holding a large envelope. He nodded at Danny and the two detectives before addressing Kat. "Are you Catherine Keel?" he asked, his voice tinged with regret. "I'm sorry to do this here." He handed Kat the envelope. "You've been served." Before she could respond, he turned and left without another word. Panic surged through Kat as she took the envelope from the man and handed it to Danny. "Open it," she urged, anxiety pulling in her stomach. Danny carefully opened the envelope and pulled out a sheet of paper, showing it to Kat. It was a petition for divorce. As Detective Lucas hurried into the hallway to find a nurse, Danny pressed the nurse call button frantically. Kat's breathing quickened as a distressed sound escaped her lips. She rocked back and forth in her hospital bed, her mind racing. Meanwhile, in a different part of town, Grant was giving Lynn Dunaway a tour of the empty office space he was considering buying. "So, you're buying the whole building?" Lynn asked, glancing around and peeking into each office. "I'm thinking about it," he replied, trying to keep his spirits up. The space had been an attorney's office for many years until the previous owner decided to sell. It had enough room for 3 attorneys and several support staff, including legal secretaries and a receptionist. It also boasted large and small meeting rooms, restrooms, and a kitchenette. "Wait until you see the second floor," Grant said with a smile, feeling a flicker of excitement amid his personal turmoil. Since learning about his wife's infidelity, Grant had found solace in his friendship with Lynn. They had talked on the phone at least 3 times a week, and she had been a tremendous source of support for him. While stationed together in Korea, Grant had always viewed her as just Captain Dunaway, but now, standing in the quiet offices of a building he was thinking of purchasing, he couldn't help but notice how striking she truly was. With her blonde hair and captivating green eyes, she had an allure that was impossible to ignore. They climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor, where a small entrance led to 2 doors facing each other. Grant unlocked both doors, stepping aside for Lynn to enter one of the rooms. As she walked in, he heard her gasp. The 2nd floor featured 2 apartments, a spacious 3,000 square foot one and a smaller 1,500 square foot unit. Both had been completely updated in recent years, showcasing modern bathrooms and kitchens with tall plaster ceilings adorned with beautiful designs. But what made Lynn gasp in awe was the stunning view of Lake Ray Ferguson, visible from nearly every room. Unlike many towns that revitalized their main squares by adding shops and eateries, Ferguson had naturally thrived thanks to its beautiful lake, named after the town's founder. The town square, just a block away from the lake, was alive with bustling shops and restaurants. When the Army Corps of Engineers built the lake as part of Franklin D. Roosevelt's work program, the town square blossomed into a vibrant community hub. The building Grant was considering buying sat at the corner of the square. The front faced the town square, one side faced the road leading to the lake, and the back overlooked the lake and a boardwalk lined with even more shops and restaurants. They stepped into the smaller apartment, and Lynn was pleasantly surprised to see that it had been updated just like the larger unit, with beautiful views of the lake. "Can you really afford this?" Lynn asked, her brow furrowed with concern. "I have my share of the money I received when my parents passed away a few years ago," Grant explained. "That money is in my fidelity account and hasn't been mixed with our joint assets, so it should be safe from my divorce settlement. There's more than enough in that account to buy the building outright." "Are you ready to be a landlord?" Lynn questioned, her interest piqued. Grant shrugged, feeling a mix of uncertainty and excitement. In addition to the law offices and large apartments on the 2nd floor, the building also has a diner for breakfast and lunch, a boutique, and an Irish pub known for its good food and live music from Wednesday to Saturday. "I'm really jealous of you," Lynn said, her smile brightening the room. As they stood there, the weight of their individual struggles faded momentarily. Grant felt a spark of hope, envisioning a future that, while uncertain, could also be filled with new beginnings. "You seem to have found something special during a difficult time in your life," Grant said, watching Lynn with a mix of admiration and hope. "But that's not the only reason I asked you here." Lynn looked at him, surprise flickering across her face. "Really? You want me to leave my job and move to Ferguson?" I don't even know what to say." "Think about it," he replied, his voice steady but excited. "You could have the 2nd apartment for free. We could be Keel and Dunaway, attorneys at law." He paused, giving her time to absorb the idea. "I'm not asking for an answer right now, but please consider it." Lynn walked through the 2nd apartment again, taking in the stunning view of the lake that stretched out before her. At 1,500 square feet, it was the same size as her current rental near Fort Cavazos in Kent, Texas. Grant watched as she ran her fingers along the sleek stone countertops in the kitchen, her gaze drifting outside as a thoughtful expression settled on her face. Meanwhile, Randy Kane sat in a small, sterile office, his frustration palpable. "What do you mean their insurance company won't help?" he mumbled to his lawyer, struggling to keep his voice low. Even that hurt a lot. Just 2 days ago, most of the wires holding his jaw shut had been removed after nearly 8 weeks. He still had pins and screws keeping his jaw together, and the popping sounds it made were driving him mad. Every time he tried to eat or drink something, the pain shot through his head, turning every bite into a struggle. The casts on his knees and elbows had come off, but the lingering discomfort from the pins and screws embedded in his joints would haunt him for the rest of his life. Months, possibly years, would pass before he could live independently again. Even the simple act of going to the bathroom still required assistance, and that would continue for several more months. "They're saying it's not their fault you were attacked on a public street," his lawyer explained, his voice tinged with frustration. "It wasn't on the Keel property, and no one has been arrested yet. The investigation is ongoing. If someone from the Keel family is found guilty of the attack on you, we can take action since their homeowner's policy has $1 million coverage. But that only applies if someone from their home is convicted." Todd Blair, Randy's lawyer, had known him since high school and had never thought highly of him. Learning that Kane was caught in this messy situation only deepened his disdain. "What's the latest on the police investigation?" Randy pressed, his voice rising with anxiety. "Every time I reach out to Detectives Mann or Lucas, they never give me a straight answer. If they even bother to call me back." Todd rubbed his forehead, staring at the speakerphone in frustration. "I spoke with Detectives Mann and Lucas yesterday," he finally said, his voice heavy with disappointment. Randy's eyes widened in anticipation. "And? I have some disappointing news," Todd replied slowly. "They wrapped up their investigation, but the meeting with the district attorney didn't go well." "What you're saying is you believe Grant Keel was behind the attack?" Randy asked, his voice rising. "No," Todd said cautiously. "We're not sure he did it, but we can't prove it." The DA's tone shifted, and he added, "It could also be his brother." The detectives exchanged uneasy glances. "And it might even be the brother's wife," the DA continued, searching for the name. "Betty Lou, or perhaps her brother, Bobby Lee Guerin." Both detectives nodded, feeling increasingly disheartened. "You both know that the goal of a criminal investigation is to narrow down suspects, not keep adding to the list," the DA said, his frustration evident. "If you keep looking into this, you might end up with a lot of names on your list." The detectives felt the weight of the DA's words, sensing their investigation slipping through their fingers. He shook his head, disappointment heavy in the air. "I'm sorry, detectives. If this is all you have, then we can't move forward. There's no way I could take this case to court. Come back when you have better evidence." Mann and Dunn returned to the Ferguson police station, the weight of their disappointing meeting with the DA weighing heavily on them. They reluctantly informed the assistant police chief, who assigned them a new case while putting Randy Kane's assault under the label of open and unsolved. As for Kat, she was dealing with her own challenges. The divorce was looming, and her lawyer had advised that it would be a waste of effort to contest it. Her actions were so well known that no judge would consider saving the marriage. Kat's best choice was to agree to the divorce and focus on mending her relationship with Grant and their son, Danny, after keeping her actions a secret for so long. Grant was fair in the divorce proceedings. He would continue paying the mortgage on their house, and Kat would receive part of his military pension since they had been married for 20 of his 25 years of service. Though she wouldn't get quite half, it was something. Grant planned to take a few pieces of furniture, some tools, and his clothing. The day finally arrived for their meeting, and Grant felt a knot in his stomach. He wasn't looking forward to it, but he knew Kat needed this chance, and he was willing to give it to her. They met in a conference room at his lawyer's office, the atmosphere heavy with unspoken words. "Grant," Kat began, her voice trembling slightly, "I know how you feel about me. No matter how harsh those feelings are, please understand this, I am even more ashamed of my actions than you can imagine. I can't justify what I did, and there's nothing I can say that would lessen my actions. I hope that one day you can forgive me and that we can be in the same room together again." Grant met her gaze, a mix of sadness and compassion in his eyes. "Kat, I loved you. Honestly, I still care for you despite everything that's happened. But I feel myself loving you a little less each day." He paused, letting his words sink in. "You have to understand how deeply this has affected me. I hear what you are saying, but rebuilding that trust will take time, if it's even possible." The room fell silent, the weight of their shared history pressing down on them. They were both at a crossroads, each grappling with their feelings and the consequences of their choices. As they sat in that conference room, the future seemed uncertain, but one thing was clear: they both had a long way to go before finding peace. As the morning light filtered through the windows, casting soft shadows on the walls, I found myself caught in a whirlwind of emotions. "You can say whatever you want about your feelings, but it doesn't change how I feel," I told Kat, my soon-to-be ex-wife. "I don't want to hurt you, but I don't wish you well either. I need to distance myself as much as I can." I could see the pain in her eyes, and it broke my heart, but I had to be honest. "I know we'll have to interact because of Denis, and there will be times we need to be together. But if I had a choice, I'd rather not see or speak to you again for the rest of my life." At my words, Kat's composure cracked, and tears filled her eyes. "Grant, please," she begged, her voice trembling. "Just do one thing for me now that our marriage has ended. Please see Denis. He misses you so much. It breaks my heart that you two haven't seen each other since you've been back." I nodded slightly, knowing I couldn't ignore her request. "I'll visit him," I promised, even as I turned to leave the meeting room with my lawyer. Once outside, I could hear Randy's frustrated voice echoing in my mind. "There has to be something I can do," he complained. "I can't coach or teach. I can't even manage the little things. I'm almost out of money, and my insurance is about to run out. What am I supposed to do?" "Have you thought about the O.J. Simpson case?" Todd replied, a knowing look in his eyes. "What are you talking about?" Randy asked, confusion etched on his face. "You remember when the jury found O.J. not guilty of harming his wife and another man?" Todd explained. "Yeah, so that man's family sued O.J. for damages. Civil suits don't require as much proof as criminal trials, and they were after a lot of money. O.J. didn't have the cash, but they took what he had. Now everyone knows he was guilty in the public's eyes." "Are you suggesting I should sue Grant Keel?" Randy's voice rose incredulously. "I don't know, it could be an option for you. It's up to you. You'll take the case?" Todd asked, but he quickly shook his head, backing away. "I'm busy, but I can suggest someone else. This is probably better for his experience anyway." Later that evening, it was a quiet gathering in my apartment after the divorce. My brother, Leland, his wife, Betty Lou, and her brother, Bobby Lee, were all chatting in the living room, their laughter echoing off the walls. I felt a sense of normalcy amid the chaos of my life. Just then, the doorbell rang. I checked my phone to see who was at the door, buzzed it open, and walked down to greet my visitor. When I opened the door, I was met with the sight of my son, Denis, standing there with a bright smile. I pulled him in for a warm embrace, holding him close for a moment before stepping back to look him in the eyes. "You look good, son," I said, forcing a smile. "You too, Dad," Denis replied, returning my smile. He stepped inside and greeted his aunt and uncle with a nod. As he turned to Bobby Lee, who he hadn't met yet, he looked a little unsure, but the tension in the room dissipated quickly. "I brought a baseball bat," Denis said, a hint of mischief in his voice. "I thought the idea was to scare him a little," he added, glancing at Betty Lou. She chuckled, shaking her head. "Really? A baseball bat? That's your plan?" Denis turned to Lynn, who was leaning against the kitchen counter. "You know everything that's been going on, right?" "I've known about everything since Korea," Lynn replied casually. "Once you sent your dad that text about the situation, I found out just 10 minutes later." Denis nodded, remembering the moment he discovered his mother's infidelity. It hit him hard, and the weight of it all had been a burden he hadn't fully processed yet. "I texted my dad the moment I found out," Denis continued. "We kept in touch the whole time, but we erased our messages to avoid any trouble. We were just trying to figure out a way to handle this without it becoming a disaster." He sighed, his youthful face clouded with frustration. "Coach Kane is starting to pressure me about not going to West Point, and the way he disrespects my family is just getting worse. After he stood in front of me in my own house, having just come from my mom's place, I felt like I had to do something. I could see the turmoil in Danny's eyes. He was at a crossroads, torn between his loyalty to his mother and his desire to protect his family. Some people say that if you seek justice, you should be prepared for it to turn against you, I said, trying to offer him wisdom. But I believe there's a way to heal by standing up for those who have wronged you. Danny nodded slowly, absorbing my words. I just want to address this situation without jeopardizing my relationship with you, he said earnestly. We both knew it wouldn't be easy. The plan was simple. Danny would keep his distance from me and my family until the divorce was finalized and the investigation resolved. As the conversation continued, he let out a frustrated sigh. Every smirk from him, every comment about being my stepfather, it just makes me furious. I had to hold myself back when he made those remarks. I wanted to confront him right then and there, but I knew I couldn't take him on directly. He's too strong for me. Leland leaned in, a grin playing on his lips. When you grabbed your bike, you were calm, but hearing how you handled that situation, I thought, yep, he's just like his dad. Betty Lou exchanged glances with Lynn, who was sipping her drink and enjoying the unfolding story. Are you sure you want to be involved with this family? She teased, raising an eyebrow at Lynn. Lynn smiled back, unfazed. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else, she said, taking another sip of her drink. As the evening wore on and our visitors left, I sat next to Lynn on the sofa, our shoulders brushing against each other. Well, partner, she began, breaking the comfortable silence, I'm glad this is over. Now we can focus on building our practice and tackling other matters. She smiled at me, and I couldn't help but smile back. Now that my divorce was final, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I could finally explore my feelings for Lynn, the woman who had been steadfast by my side through the darkest moments of my life. The next morning, I was in my office, reviewing a will for a client, when I heard the buzz of the front door signaling someone's arrival at the law offices of Keel and Dunway. Lynn emerged from her office, her expression curious. We didn't have a receptionist yet, so it was just the two of us. Can we help you? Lynn asked as a middle-aged man walked into the reception area. He looked a bit heavyset and appeared nervous. I'm looking for Grant Keel, he said, looking around. That's me, I replied, stepping forward to shake his hand. Instead of a handshake, however, he handed me an envelope. You've been served, he said with an apologetic shrug before turning on his heel and leaving the office. I stood there, stunned, feeling the weight of the envelope in my hands. A sense of dread washed over me as I realized that this was just another complication in a life that had already spiraled out of control. As I sat down across from Roland Cruz, a troubled look crossed his face. The wheels of justice were turning, and I knew it was time to brace myself for whatever storm was coming next. Raleigh Cruz was well aware of the controversy surrounding the former head coach of the Ferguson Wildcats. After a recent scandal, Kane had lost his job with the Ferguson School District due to an inappropriate relationship with a married teacher. As a defense attorney, Raleigh was all too familiar with the stigma attached to his clients. When he entered a courtroom with a client, the judges often assumed guilt right off the bat. So, you're involved with this guy's wife, and her son knows about it, and he's okay with it? Raleigh asked, disbelief etched on his face. Randy Kane nodded, his expression a mix of frustration and resignation. I know it sounds unusual, but Danny Keel and I had a really good friendship.